Hello, my name is Shad Sluter. I'm a professor at Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona. I'd like to share with you a presentation that I gave recently called 5 Ways to Do Faith Integration. Now, faith integration is the idea of taking the Christian worldview and applying it in your vocation. So here's an outline of where we're going. In the first presentation that you're seeing right now, we're going to identify possible ways that you could bring up the subject of faith and include it into your classroom. And then I'm going to show you another presentation about some specific examples that I've used in my classroom, and then some ideas on where and how you can share this with others once you've figured out how you're going to use this. So first of all, in this presentation, let's talk about identifying some possible lessons that you've already taught and how you can use them in your classroom with faith. For example, we have 5 basic ideas that we came up with as a committee in our technology team of how we can use faith in our learning. So number 1, we considered the ethical considerations of many things we do. 2, which is metaphysical, which simply is the question of why. Why does something exist? Why do we do it the way we do? 3, we take Christian content and we take passages from the Bible or examples from the church, and then we use those in a related area to what we're studying. Number 4 is called character and relationships. In this way, we take the idea of the life-changing power of the gospel and say, how does that affect your vocation? And then finally, with the 5th one, we talk about the ways that Christianity and life have been used in the past, and some famous scientists or other people in our vocation that we admire. So let's start with the first one and talk about some details and some specific examples of ethical considerations in our faith. So first of all, let's say we were just to study in our college faith and the question of health sciences. These ethical considerations just jump off the page. They're everywhere, such as abortion, suicide, cloning, reproduction, origins, end-of-life decisions, animal welfare, statistical interpretation methods in the ethics there, the environment, medical costs, and of course, the list is just getting started. There are debates on this everywhere, and the Christian worldview certainly has its opinion. Next is the college that we work with called the College of Engineering, and you can ask ethical questions in engineering. It's not just about turning bolts and making circuits. For instance, weapons manufacturing. Should students be applying for jobs that create bombs and guns? How about manufacturing policies? How about disruptive technologies? How about the ethics of faulty products? What about intellectual property? These are all ethical issues that relate to engineering, and the Christian worldview would have something to say. Finally, in the college where I work, which is the Programming and Computer Science, does technology have any ethical issues? Well, it certainly does. How about information privacy, the idea of net neutrality, the nature of artificial intelligence, cybercrime, national security issues? And so first of all, ethical considerations are not just something that you see in church. They are in your vocation in every part. And so that's the first and most obvious way that you can think of the Christian worldview and how you use it in your classroom. The second is a category that we came up with in the committee called metaphysical. So metaphysics is the idea that we question why, the origin, the source. And so you can see here from my scholarly research on Wikipedia, I see that the word metaphysics comes from the Greek word that literally means beyond nature. It is questions about being and existence and reality. So specifically, what kind of questions would you find in your curriculum that would relate to the Christian worldview? Well, let's go back to science and health again. So the big question, probably the ultimate question, why is there anything? Why is there a universe? And then why does life work? And of course, why do you matter? So then here in engineering, we could ask some very existence questions as well. Why build something new at all? Why design something different? And the second would be, why would we spend our time inventing trivial things and overlook essential needs? That's certainly a Christian world question. For instance, an engineer can build a better iPhone, We all need a better iPhone. But then you can look at essential needs, such as, can we invent a cheaper way to drill for water where people don't have drinking water? Or can we invent a better way to serve human needs rather than human greeds? Here's another category called technology, and these are examples of existence questions as well, such as the question of artificial intelligence. Can you imagine a machine that actually is alive, it's self-aware, and creative? And what will that do to us as humans? How about this question about virtual reality? Can you actually lose somebody from the real reality and make them into a person that lives in an alternate reality? So these are just not science fiction questions. They're becoming more real as the technology improves. So here's a less intense way, you might say, where you could take Christian ideas in the Christian worldview and introduce it into your classroom. Let's just talk about content. Content that you use in your examples. Everyone has to solve problems, everyone has to write about something, and so Christian content is the idea of taking something from the biblical world and putting it into your problems that you work out in everyday examples. This one certainly is not controversial in the fact that it's whether we live or die, but it is taking the content of the Bible, such as, let's take the physics behind David's sling. Or maybe you just ask, how does a sling work? What is angular momentum? What is centrifugal force? And so we have these questions that we could take right from the Bible. How about engineering? So we could take the seaworthiness of Noah's Ark, for example, and see if it's actually a good design with the dimensions that we know. So it's a biblical content, but it's not so much controversial as the ethical questions. How about technology? So in our department, one of our professors is using virtual reality. So the user takes these virtual reality glasses and immerses himself or herself into the story. So you can see from the example here, you can walk around the Garden of Eden. You can see the apple. You can hear the snake. You can look at the fruit on the trees. Or maybe from another Bible story where you have Peter walking on the water, where Peter is seen from behind him and he hears the disciples talking to him and what they say about him. Or you might look from the point of view of the fish underneath the water, and as you look up, you can see Peter's feet plunging in as he sinks. Or you might see from the heavenly point of view, you can see that God is actually in control of the situation. Or from the point of view of Jesus' eyes, how does he view his disciples? With apathy, with patheticness, with compassion, with anxiety? What's his point of view? And so the virtual reality is a great way to put yourself in a story, and what better story than the Bible story. In the fourth way, we're going to talk about integrating faith into your vocation, is the idea about your character and your relationships. After all, your faith is supposed to transform the way you live. And so look at these lists of fruit of the Spirit. So we know that they are a nice list in the Bible, but how do they relate to us when we have actual instances in our lives? So the first three of the fruit of the Spirit talk about our love, joy, and peace. So we could ask ourselves and evaluate our own lives as teachers. How content are you with your life? How do you impact the culture of the people in your classroom? And so trying to encourage one another to model this idea of peacefulness. How about the second category called goodness, kindness, and patience? So what is goodness? Goodness is the practice of doing good. Not doing well, but doing good. Practicing things that are good for other people. Volunteering. Doctors Without Borders. Engineers Without Borders. Or perhaps, and once again from the technology world, volunteermatch.org or some other website where you can match up people that have nonprofit service-related ideas and they need volunteers with your skills. And so practicing Christian behavior means practicing goodness. How about this last three? Faithfulness, gentleness, and let's talk about self-control, emphasizing that. So part of your lesson might be to emphasize that just because we have something doesn't mean it needs to be done. Computer technology makes our vices easier to practice. Pornography, hate speech, cheating, bullying. The technology itself is not bad. What we do with it is. And so, as the adult in the room, your job as a Christian worldview integration specialist in your job is to take the position that we have a moral obligation for Christian character. So these three here are sometimes put into the categories of how we relate to God, how we relate to others, and how we relate to ourselves. And so these are great ways to introduce how faith affects your vocation. Lastly, let's talk about the biblical background idea of integrating faith. So a historical background would be taking somebody that is a well-known believer, such as Isaac Newton, and looking at what he said. For instance, his quote here. He says, "Gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who set the planets in motion." And so we're not judging him based on his scientific expertise here. We're looking at a person who is far beyond any of us in his intellect and his understanding, and yet he was not the typical atheist scientist that we see in many cases today. So why? Also, when we talk about history, there's not just good Christian history, there's also some things that were done wrong. So we can take biographies from people like Isaac Newton, but we can also see people like Galileo and his struggles with the church and how he was banned from publishing some of his findings because they seemed to be contrary to the theology of the day. And so we have ways that we can integrate faith and learning. And so in this presentation, we've just talked about possible ways that we could identify lessons and potential points of interest where faith and learning seem to go together. In another presentation, I'd like to talk to you about some examples of actual classroom materials that we've used, both me and my colleagues in our college, and then finally in another presentation of how we can share this with others and actually create a change in our curriculum when we do our class revisions. And so thank you for watching the integration of faith and learning here at Grand Canyon University.